She never told a soul she was hungry. Not the mailman, not her daughter, not even God on the loneliest nights. But the dog knew. He waited behind the food pantry, silent under the splintered table like an old memory come back to breathe. And one day, what she thought was forgotten came walking back with a name tag and a promise. Part won the scraps she could spare. Ethel Hargrove did not believe in taking more than you gave. That is what her daddy had taught her back in the winter of 49, when she was 8 years old and old enough to understand that pride could fill a belly just as well as beans, if you let it. So she carried the truth through every powdered milk line, every stretch of ration stamps, every tray she slid across school lunch counters for 35 years. And now, at 74, it was pride that kept her from stepping foot inside the food pantry on Cider Street, even when her cupboards mocked her with their echo. But the dog knew. He waited behind the food pantry each Wednesday evening, just before dusk, when the last volunteer locked up the side door and the sun folded over the roof like the lid of a pot. Ethel never asked whose dog he was or why he never barked. She just called him boy, the same way her late husband used to call the neighborhood strays that sniffed around their porch back in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Here, she would whisper, her voice barely louder than the rustle of the magnolia leaves in the alley. Got a little something for you. He would step out from beneath the broken folding table, propped against the brick wall like a leaning cross, his eyes twin lamps of amber sorrow. She could not tell what kind he was, some kind of hound mix, maybe brown with patches of white around his muzzle and one ear curled funny like it never healed right. She liked that about him. He looked a little busted. Brought you the ham rind today, she said, pulling a napkin-wrapped bundle from her coat pocket and unfolding it carefully. Did he eat the greens? Neither. Too much salt for me these days. The dog inched forward, slow and cautious, like he would learn not to trust hands too quickly. But he never flinched when Ethel placed the food on the concrete. And he never left until she turned her back to go. You and me, she said, her voice cracking more from time than emotion. We keep our hunger to ourselves. Do not. She shuffled home along Magnolia Avenue, her rubber-soled shoes skimming the sidewalk with that whispery sound only the old and wary make. The houses here were smaller now, or maybe just emptier. Like hers, her husband had died 12 years ago. Her daughter lived in Atlanta with 2 teenage boys who did not know how to write thank you cards, and the only calls she got were from robocallers trying to sell her medical alert buttons. Still, she would never once walked into that pantry for herself. It was not charity she minded. It was being seen as needy. That Wednesday night, she sat at her small kitchen table with a mug of hot water, no tea bag, and stared at the 1 can of soup left on the shelf. Tomato. Store brand. Dented on the side. She was saving it for Friday. A knock rattled her front door. She blinked. No one knocked at night. Not anymore. Peering through the lace curtain, she saw only shadow. Then a flash of brown and white fur darted across her porch. She whispered, unlatching the door. But when she opened it, the porch was empty. The next Wednesday, she returned to the pantry, scraps of cornbread and a chicken bone wrapped in foil. The sun was lower this time, the air heavier with that thick October stillness right before the leaves surrender. He was not there. She waited. 5 minutes. Then 10. She set the foil down anyway. Maybe next week, she said, heart sinking with something deeper than disappointment. When she turned to leave, A voice stopped her. Hargrove. She turned around. Startled. A man stood just beyond the alley mouth. Tall. Dressed too nice for this part of town. He looked maybe 40. Handsome in a tired sort of way. Like someone who used to smile more. Yes, she said, stepping back slightly. He took off his cap and held it to his chest. You used to work at Jefferson Elementary, did not you? She squinted. Studying him. His voice had something familiar beneath the polish. A rasp that curled around her memory like an old radio station tuning in. Lord, you must be mistaken. That was decades ago. Madam, he said gently, it was you. You were the lunch lady. You gave me extra on Thursdays. I never forgot. Her throat tightened. Child, I do not even know your name. Malcolm Reed, he said, but back then, everyone called me Bug. The name struck like a bell. She remembered now. Skinny kid, always wore the same red hoodie, face smudged with chalk dust, eyes hollow like he was trying not to cry all the time. She used to slip him 2 rolls instead of 1, tell him jokes while she scooped the mashed potatoes, never asked why he always came early, or why he looked so thin, but she knew. You remember the dog? He said, voice lowering. Don T.U. What dog? The one behind the pantry. Malcolm said, taking a slow step forward. His name's Ranger. He was mine. We lived out back of the old mill until I got taken into foster care. I came back for him once I made it out. He waited for years. He do not trust easy. Ethel felt something knock against her chest. A memory. A truth too big for her ribs. She whispered. Madam? Malcolm said, smiling now through something wet and shining. I came back for him, and I came back for you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside it was a voucher. Then another. Then a note that simply read, you will never go hungry again. Ethel did not know whether to laugh or slap the good sense back into him. But what she could do was sink down onto the broken table beside Ranger, who had emerged from the shadows, wagging slow and cautious. And for the first time in years, she let someone else do the feeding, part to the bone and the bread line. The next morning, Ethel Hargrove stood at her sink, hands in the dishwater though there were no dishes left to clean. The envelope sat on the counter beside a salt shaker and a faded church bulletin from 2 weeks ago. She had not opened it again. Didn't he need to? She remembered the words. You will never go hungry again. She did not know how long she would stood there before she realized she was humming. A tune she had not thought of in years in the garden. The one her mama used to sing while kneading dough. Back before the world had powdered eggs and government cheese. Her hands, pruny and pale, lifted the envelope like it might bite. Inside were 4 neatly stacked food vouchers for the local market, and a note from Malcolm, handwritten in blocky letters like a boy trying hard to be understood. No strings. You fed me when no one else did. Please let me feed you now. She sat down hard at the kitchen table, the chair legs squealing against the linoleum like they were startled. Her pride bristled, curled up like a cat disturbed mid-sleep. Lord, what am I supposed to do with this? She muttered aloud. No answer came, unless you counted the groan of the old refrigerator or the crow complaining from the wire outside. Ethel folded the vouchers again, slow and careful, and tucked them under the sugar canister, just for now, just until she figured it all out. She had not even noticed the dog until the third knock came at her door. Tap, tap, pause, tap. She pulled the curtain back. There he was, Ranger, sitting like a statue on her stoop. Sunlight caught the grizzle on his muzzle, painting him silver. "Well, I will be," she murmured. "You followed me home." He did not wag, did not bark, just stared up at her, steady and still, as if she owed him something more than scraps. She opened the door and stood there, apron still tied at her waist, arms folded over her chest. "You got a nerve, dog. I do not keep no pets." Ranger did not move. "I am serious now. I am not some lonely old lady gonna start baking you biscuits and letting you sleep on the good couch." Still, he did not move. Finally, she sighed and stepped aside. "Just one morning, that is all." Ranger walked past her like a ghost with manners, heading straight for the spot under the table, like he had always known it was meant for him. She tossed him the last crust of cornbread from her supper and poured some water into an old chip bowl. He ate slow, no panic in it, like he knew there'd be more tomorrow. Ethel watched him from the stove, arms crossed, something soft in her jaw she had not felt in years. "You know," she said, half to herself, "I never meant to get involved in all this." Ranger did not look up, just finished the last bite and laid his chin on his paws. That afternoon, she walked to the market on Spruce, the smaller one that still printed prices on little orange stickers and carried the pickled pig's feet she used to buy for her husband, Raymond. The vouchers felt like hot stones in her pocket, each step toward the checkout line heavier than the last. She only picked up the basics: milk, rice, a sack of beans, a small tin of coffee she did not need but could not resist. When she handed over the first voucher, the cashier did not flinch, just smiled and said, "You have a blessed day now." Ethel walked home with her paper sack clutched tight and tears stinging the edges of her eyes, not because of the help, but because no one looked at her like she did not belong. Back at the house, Ranger met her at the porch, tail wagging just once. "You waiting on supper already?" She huffed, brushing her sleeve across her cheek. "Pushy little thing." "Eat." He followed her inside again, like he lived there. That night, she set out 2 plates. One for him. Just beans and cornbread, but warm. Shared. By the third evening, she had pulled out the old dog bed from the attic, the one they used to keep for her daughter's beagle when he visited. Ranger did not lie in it. He still preferred the table, but she set it there anyway, near the heater. She also added a name tag to the water bowl, Ranger, and when she went to the pantry the next Wednesday, she brought 2 sandwiches, just in case. But something shifted that week. On Thursday morning, Ethel received a letter, not in the mailbox on her porch. Under a river stone she kept to prop open the screen door. The envelope had no stamp, no return address. Inside was a typed note. "You helped me survive when I was a hungry child. You gave without asking, without shaming. This town forgot you. I did not. More is coming." No signature. Ethel read the letter 3 times. She did not show it to anyone, just folded it, pressed it into her Bible next to Psalm 37, and let the tears come. That night, Ranger slept at her feet, and in the distance, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and something else. Change. Part 3. The table. Set again. The first frost came early that year. Ethel Hargrove could feel it in her knuckles before she saw it on the grass. When she opened the door that morning, the world outside was rimmed in pale silver, like God had breathed cold breath across the whole town and forgot to take it back. Ranger did not stir from under the table, not even when the screen door creaked. She did not blame him. The old folding table sat lopsided in her kitchen corner now, legs propped up by a brick on one side and a stack of 1996 Reader's Digests on the other. It looked ridiculous, she knew, but it was the only spot Ranger would settle beneath. She tried moving the table once and he whimpered, soft and low, like something old had cracked open in his bones. So she put it back. That was 3 days ago. It had become a kind of altar bread crumbs. Bone fragments. A dish of water with bits of cornbread floating like little boats. Her late husband's mug sat on top. Still chipped, still full of memories. This morning, she made grits. Not instant. Real. She stirred the pot with a wooden spoon, so worn down the handle was shaped to her hand. Poured the hot grits into 2 bowls, added a pat of butter to each, then stopped herself. She had gone and made 2 servings without thinking. Ranger lifted his head at the smell, slow and reluctant. His one crooked ear perked slightly, and Ethel chuckled under her breath. Lazy bones. She said, come on then, it is hot. He took the food gently. Like always. No mess. No noise. Just quiet gratitude. I do not know what I am doing feeding you like this, she said. Watching him. You are not even mine. He finished. Sat back, licked his paw, looked at her, and for a moment, just a blink, she could swear she saw a different dog's face in those eyes. Younger, thinner, just as hungry. She shook the thought off and reached for the kettle, made herself weak tea. No sugar. The envelope was still tucked in her Bible. The unsigned letter had started to wear at her resolve, not because of what it promised, but because it had made her feel seen, and being seen, at her age, came with its own weight. That afternoon, she took a slow walk to the pantry, not for food, just to see. The alley was empty. The folding table, the one Ranger used to wait under, was still there but sagging further, now half covered by a blue tarp someone had tossed over it like a shroud. She stood there, hands stuffed in her coat pockets, heart beating a little faster than it should. Someone had added a new sign to the back door. Coming soon. Community supper nights, all welcome. No forms. No fuss. Below it, a name was handwritten in black marker. Councilman Malcolm Reed. Ethel's mouth went dry. So he had not just meant the vouchers. This was bigger. She shuffled home, her cane tapping more loudly than usual. She did not like things being stirred up. Not in a town like this. People talked. People remembered too much, or worse, too little. Ranger met her on the porch again. His tail gave a single thump. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "I ain't part of no soup line. I do not care who is running it." But the next Wednesday, she found herself standing at the pantry again. And this time, there were people. Not many. Just a few older folks she recognized from the pharmacy line. Some teenagers with sagging backpacks. A young mother with 2 little ones clinging to her coat. And Malcolm, standing by a folding table full of steaming trays. The same folding table. The one from the alley. He would scrubbed it down, fixed the legs, and draped it in a checkered cloth that fluttered slightly in the autumn wind. He spotted her and smiled. No fanfare. No announcement. Just walked over with 2 styrofoam bowls in hand. Creamy chicken and rice. He said, "Hargrove, would you join me?" She stared at the bowls, then at him, then at the table, and slowly, stiffly, she nodded. They sat at the edge of the lot on a pair of old milk crates. She tasted the soup, hot, well seasoned, just like the kind she used to serve 1,000 years ago behind a cafeteria window. She swallowed hard. "You are making a spectacle." She muttered. "I am making dinner," Malcolm said gently, "for anyone who needs it." They sat in silence for a long while. Then Ethel whispered, "He waits under my table now, just like he used to wait behind this place." Malcolm looked over. "Ranger?" She nodded. "I think he always knew where he belonged," he said. A gust of wind knocked a napkin off the table, and Ethel caught it midair, sharp and fast for her age. "I never asked if you had enough to eat," she said. "Back then, I just gave you seconds. You did not have to ask." He replied, "You saw me?" She looked down at her bowl. The steam was gone now, but her hands were warm. She did not know what to say next, so she said nothing. Beside her, Malcolm stood and stretched. "I have got one more surprise for you. If you have got the time." "Old," she said flatly. "All I got is time." He grinned. "Then let us go home." Rangers waiting. Part 4, the collar in the drawer. They walked the long way back. Not because of the distance. Ethel's house was just 7 blocks from the food pantry, but because it gave them both a little more time to adjust to what was changing between them. A retired lunch lady and a city councilman, walking side by side under the first bruised clouds of November. Leaves crunched underfoot. Their breath showed in little puffs. Neither spoke much. Malcolm carried her plastic soup container tucked neatly into a paper bag. Even though she told him 3 times she could manage, he kept offering his elbow anyway, which she ignored until a crooked bit of sidewalk made her stumble. She did not thank him when he caught her arm. She did not need to. When they reached the porch, Ranger was waiting, head lifted, ears alert. Malcolm knelt down slowly. "Buddy," he said, "you remember me?" Ranger did not move, but his eyes softened. A long pause, then the slightest twitch of his tail. Ethel stepped past them, unlocked the door, and let the screen slam behind her. She did not like crying in front of anyone. Inside, the warmth of the house hugged her. Familiar, clean, sparse. Malcolm lingered at the doorway. "You mind if I sit for a bit?" he asked, still half kneeling beside the dog. "Suit yourself," she called from the kitchen, "but I am not making coffee. It is after 3. He chuckled. "Water's fine." By the time she came back with 2 glasses, he was seated in the same old chair Raymond used to prefer, the one with the split in the cushion and the tiny cross carved into the wood near the leg. Ranger had settled beside him, head resting against Malcolm's boot. Ethel lowered herself across from them, glass in hand. "You said you had a surprise," she said, narrowing her eyes. "I do not like surprises. I think you will like this one." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, time-worn object wrapped in red cloth. It It looked like nothing at first, just an old rag folded in quarters. But when he placed it on the table and unwrapped it, her breath hitched. It was a collar, frayed leather, bent buckle, one metal tag so rusted it was barely legible. But she knew it. The shape, the smell. Her hands hovered above it. Trembling, "I gave him this," she whispered, "right after I found him behind the gym. You gave me that," Malcolm corrected gently. "You brought me a sandwich in a paper bag and handed me this collar. Said it was for Ranger, and if anyone asked, I should say I found it." She stared at him. "I do not remember that." "I do," he said, softly. "I remember everything." She blinked hard, pressing her lips together. Her memory was not what it used to be. Names, dates, old chore lyrics, they slipped now, like soup in the shower. But that collar, that dog, that year, yes, it was coming back now. Back in 1989, there had been a boy who hid in the utility shed behind the school. She would found him one afternoon, curled up under a tattered blanket with a dog, so thin you could see the ribs twitch when it breathed. She had not told the principal. She would fed him. For weeks, she brought lunch scraps and cans of soup, always in secret. He never asked for more, never begged, just smiled that tired smile and shared every bite with the mutt. One day, both were gone. She would told herself they found a better place, a safer one. Now he was sitting in her living room, with the same dog, or the dog's twin, curled at his feet like time had not passed at all. "I never stopped wondering what happened to you," she said. "I never stopped wondering if you remembered me." He replied, "I did not until now. That is okay." They sat there for a long while, letting the years catch up. Then, in a voice so low it almost disappeared, Ethel said, "I kept that collar, the twin to it, the one I meant to give you first." She pushed herself up and walked to the back bedroom, opened the dresser drawer she had not touched in over a decade. Under old scarves and a yellowing church program, she found it. Still intact. Still hers. She brought it out and laid it next to the one Malcolm had saved. Two halves of something lost. "Funny," she said. "Back then, I thought I was saving a child and his dog, but maybe it was me that needed saving." He looked at her, tears starting to rim his eyes. "You did save me," he said, "and now it is my turn." Ranger let out a deep sigh and shifted closer to the heater vent. The two collars lay side by side on the table. Ethel reached out and placed one gentle hand on each. "My husband always said," she murmured, "when the world forgets you, it is the dogs that remember." Malcolm nodded. He was right. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering brittle leaves across the porch. A storm was coming, but inside that little house on Magnolia Avenue, the air felt warmer than it had in years. Part 5. What the dog carried. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain lashed the windows like fingers trying to get in, and wind howled down Magnolia Avenue, making the gutters sing low and mean. Ethel Hargrove woke to the rattle of her back screen door flapping loose, and the shiver of old floorboards reacting to cold. She did not light a lamp. Didn't he need to? She shuffled to the kitchen in her robe and wool socks, the hymn dragging, the house humming with storm, noise and memory. Ranger was already awake, curled under the crook table like always, eyes gleaming in the dark. He did not lift his head, just thumped his tail once as if to say, "I know. I heard it too. Poor thing," she whispered, patting his side. "Storm's no friend to bones like ours." She poured a splash of milk into a saucer, added a bit of cornbread from the bread tin, and set it beside him. He did not move right away, not until she turned her back, as if he still believed eating in front of others was impolite. The screen door gave another mournful bang. She walked over, tugged it shut, and this time latched it proper. The rain smelled like mud and old tin. It smelled like the storms of her childhood, when her mama would heat a wash basin on the stove and hum hymns until thunder stopped sounding like war drums. She thought of Malcolm, of the two collars on the table, of the boy with hollow cheeks who had become a man with keys to City Hall. And she thought, not for the first time, why me? Why had she been the one to find that boy? Why had that boy come back? Why had that dog waited all these years under a folding table behind a food pantry, as if waiting for her to be hungry enough to notice? The next morning, the storm had passed, but the trees still trembled. Ethel stepped out onto her porch with a cup of instant coffee and a scarf over her hair. Across the street, Bodrux's trash cans had toppled, and wet paper plates littered the sidewalk like petals. Down the street, a blue city truck was parked outside the old mill, the one where Malcolm once lived, back when he was still bug and life had smaller words and heavier hunger. Two men in safety vests were unloading folding chairs and boxes. She squinted. Was that another table? An hour later, Malcolm appeared on her porch with a clipboard in one hand and a cinnamon roll in the other. "I brought peace offerings," he said. "I do not make war." She replied, but took the roll anyway. They sat on the porch steps, sharing the cinnamon between them while Ranger watched from the doorframe like a sentinel with fur. Malcolm took a long breath, then said, "I am turning the old mill's loading bay into a weekend food station. Real meals. Produce, not just cans, sit-down tables. Volunteer cooks. No ids, no shame." Ethel stared at him, chewing slowly. "Who is paying for it?" "Private donors, my own fund, and some help from local churches." She raised an eyebrow. "And you expect people to just come, sit down, and eat? No questions asked. That is the plan. That is a foolish plan." He smiled. "You always did call things straight." She looked down at her lap. Crumbs clung to her fingers like ash. "And what about pride?" she asked. "What about the folks who'd rather eat expired crackers in the dark than admit they can't afford a sack of rice?" He did not answer right away, just picked a piece of the roll apart and fed it to Ranger, who took it gently. "As always, they will come," Malcolm said finally, "when they are ready, just like you did." "I did not come," she said. He looked at her. She lowered her eyes. "You brought the pantry to me." The air was quiet for a moment, thick, but not heavy, just full of something neither one could quite name yet. Then Ethel asked, "You got room at those tables for an old woman who used to wear a hairnet and boss kids around with a serving spoon?" Malcolm's grin widened. "We have been saving you a seat." That night, Ethel sat at her kitchen table and opened the bottom drawer of the sideboard. Inside was an old photo album she had not touched in years. Most of the pages were curling at the edges, and several of the snapshots had stuck together from heat or time. She turned the pages slowly. One photo caught her. A cafeteria line, 1987. Her hair still dark, her apron starched, a child with wide eyes and a dog at his side, grainy and almost out of frame. His arm was around the mutt like a shield. She had not remembered someone had taken it. But there it was, proof of that boy, that dog, that moment. She traced her finger along the corner of the image and whispered, "So you did carry him, did not you?" Ranger stirred under the table, gave a low, contented grunt, then went still again, and in that quiet, she remembered something her mama used to say on long nights. When the world forgets your name, the good you did keeps saying it anyway. Ethel closed the album, heart beating slow and deep like a hymn sung by one voice in an empty church. Part 6. The seat beside her. The chairs came on a Friday, 27 of them, all mismatched, plastic lawn seats, folding metal ones with peeling paint, a few padded dining chairs rescued from church basements and garage sales. They were lined up in rows behind the old mill, like an open-air chapel waiting for a sermon. Ethel Hargrove watched from the sidelines, her arms folded tight against the wind. She wore her best coat, the brown wool one, with the large buttons and satin lining that had thinned to near threadbare, but refused to wear the gloves Malcolm had offered. Her hands still worked. They could stay cold. Behind her, volunteers bustled. Teenagers in borrowed aprons, grandmothers in hairnets, a man with tattoos stirring a pot bigger than a washtub. Something simmered that smelled like hope onions and garlic and chicken stock. A banner hung crooked on the brick wall. Saturday suppers, everyone welcome. She did not like the word welcome. It felt like someone saying you do not belong here, but we are letting you in anyway. Still, she stayed. That first night, she did not sit down right away, just hovered by the far table, helping organize the breadbasket and keeping her hands busy. The line of guests trickled in slow. A mother with 3 children, their eyes darting at the steam trays like they were not sure it was real. An elderly man with a navy pin on his jacket who did not meet anyone's gaze. A woman in a hotel housekeeping uniform who looked too tired to eat. And then more. No one said much, but they ate. And Ethel quietly, efficiently refilled the sweet tea pitchers and stacked napkins into neat little triangles. Across the lot, Malcolm moved from table to table, greeting folks, asking nothing, remembering names. He made it look easy. Ethel knew better. Halfway through the evening, someone tapped her elbow. "You are not going to sit." She turned. It was the woman from the housekeeping uniform, maybe late 30s, face lined more from exhaustion than age. Ethel looked down at the food in her hands. She had not realized she would fixed herself a plate. "I guess I forgot how," she said, more honestly than she meant to. The woman smiled, then nodded to the seat beside her. "Come on, then. You can teach me." They sat together. No small talk, just chewing and silence, and the warm scrape of metal forks on paper plates. At some point, Ethel caught sight of Ranger, curled beneath the buffet table, out of everyone's way but close enough to watch. He always watched. After supper, when the tables were cleared and the children had started chasing one another between chair legs, Ethel found herself beside Malcolm near the edge of the lot. "Did you see him?" she asked. He glanced toward the buffet. "Ranger," she said. "That man with the navy pin. He did not eat his biscuit." Malcolm nodded. "He might take it home, or maybe he is saving it for someone." Ethel sighed. Too many folks still feel like they have to earn every bite. All wounds take time, he said. She glanced at him. So do old habits? He smiled. You still folding napkins like you are in a lunch line? She snorted. Better than standing around flapping my gums like some city councilman, I know. He laughed deep. Honest. It startled her how much she liked the sound. I have been thinking, he said, growing serious again. This thing, it is not just meals. It is a memory, a place where people can be known. Ethel looked at the crowd. No one was rushing. No one was judging. They were eating slowly, gratefully, like the food had been waiting on them, like they mattered. Maybe, she said, but do not make it too pretty. People like me, we do not trust pretty. Then we will keep it honest. She nodded once. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw Ranger rise slowly and make his way through the chairs, not to her, but to a boy sitting alone near the back, no older than 10. The boy held out a crust of cornbread without a word. Ranger took it, then curled up beside him like they would known each other forever. Ethel felt her throat tighten. She did not know if that boy had a home, or a story, or a name anyone had used kindly in a long time. But she knew this. A dog that waited years beneath a folding table did not give his trust to just anyone. She turned to Malcolm. Voice soft. You ever think maybe the dog was never waiting for you or me? He looked puzzled. Then who? She watched the boy's hand resting gently on Ranger's head. Maybe, she whispered. He was waiting for whoever needed him next. And with that, she finally let herself sit, not to serve, not to supervise, just to rest, because the seat beside her was no longer empty. Part 7. What remains warm. The temperature dropped hard that week. By Wednesday, the cold came in through the floorboards and settled in Ethel Hargrove's sneeze like a long-held grudge. She sat by the window with a lap quilt and a hot water bottle, watching frost feather across the glass. Ranger snored softly beneath the table, his breath fogging a patch of linoleum with each exhale. She did not turn on the heat, not yet. There were habits, orders, that told her to wait until December, until it was really cold, until the pipe under the sink made that clank that meant, woman. Instead, she tucked her arms inside the quilt and thought about Saturday. Word was spreading. The supper behind the mill was no longer just a hush-hush gathering for the quietly hungry. People were talking, sharing, showing up. A few left donations in envelopes. Some brought casseroles, still warm, wrapped in kitchen towels that smelled like someone's grandma. There'd even been music last time, a boy with a cracked guitar and a voice like gravel and gospel. He sang Lean on Me and the older folks joined in. Ethel had not sung, but she tapped her foot. Malcolm had leaned over and whispered, "You are not fooling anyone." She would rolled her eyes, but her foot had not stopped. Sipping weak tea and watching the mailman walk past, she wondered what it meant, this thing that was growing. It had started with a dog, a memory, a need too quiet to name out loud, and now it was a table, a real one. Not the broken, folding kind people crouched under in shame, but a place where you chose to sit with others, where no one measured your worth by the weight of your wallet or the holes in your coat. A knock at the door startled her. She rose slowly, knees creaking, quilt dragging behind like a cape. When she opened the door, Malcolm stood there holding a cardboard box. "You are early," she said, Supper's 2 days away. He nodded toward the box. Thought you might want to help pack winter kits. Scarves, gloves, socks. Donations came in this morning. She stepped aside, put it on the table, watched the legs still wobbly. He carried it in, Ranger giving one lazy tail wag from his place beneath the table, as they sorted the contents. Soft wool hats, thermal socks, mismatched mittens. Ethel found a scarf she recognized. Mercy, she said. This was mine, from back when Raymond and I still took the church bus to Branson. Malcolm held it up. You want to keep it? She hesitated. Someone else needs its warmth now. He nodded and folded it gently back into the box. They worked quietly. No radio. Just the tick of the kitchen clock and the occasional clink of metal zippers. When they were done, she put on a pot of soup, just lentils and celery. But warm. They ate at the table with Ranger between them, head resting on one of her slippers like it was a pillow. Malcolm wiped his mouth with a paper napkin and leaned back. You ever think about what we leave behind? He asked. Ethel did not look up. Only when I am awake. He chuckled. Seriously. She stirred her spoon slowly. I think about the kids I fed, the ones who needed seconds but did not ask. I wonder where they are now, if they remember the cornbread, or the way I always cut the crusts off on Fridays. They remember, Malcolm said. I did. That was different. You had a dog. You gave me that dog. She said, looking at him now, I gave you scraps. You made him yours. He did not argue. Just nodded, lips pressed in a line. Ethel leaned forward. Voice lower. You want to leave something behind. Malcolm. Build tables. Not statues. Feed people. Remember their names. He looked at her for a long moment. I am going to write that down, he said. You do not have to. She replied, You already are. Later that night, after he was gone, and the leftover soup was cooling on the counter, Ethel reached under the table and gently stroked Ranger's head. You are not just a dog, she whispered. You are a witness. His eyes opened, dark and steady. You remember the ones no one else does. And somehow, you know when it is time to help us remember. Outside, the wind began to rise again. Winter was coming fast. But inside that little kitchen, something still remained warm. Part ate the names on the napkins. The wind howled like an old train through the alley behind the mill, rattling the loose gutters and pulling at the banner strung above the chairs. It was Saturday again, and the supper line was longer than ever. Ethel Hargrove stood behind the bread table, sleeves rolled, cheeks pink from cold. She was spooning honey butter into tiny paper cups and pretending her hands did not ache. The wind slipped through her coat like a thief, but she stayed. Malcolm had offered to move the supper inside, just a few blocks away. The old armory stood mostly empty, but she would said no. We start under the sky, she would told him. Let people feel seen. So here they were, breath fogging in front of them, chili steaming in big aluminum trays, children wrapped in scarves like little mummies. The chairs had been huddled into tighter rows, closer together, and folks did not linger as long. But they still came. They still came. Ranger sat near the end of the line, watching. As usual, he had a new red bandana around his neck, now embroidered with his name in stitched thread by one of the retired seamstresses who came early to help. For the dog who waits, she would call him. But today, he was not waiting. He was looking, eyes scanning each face like he was searching for someone who had not arrived yet. A girl with pink gloves and a missing front tooth came up to Ethel's table, her tray trembling in her mittened hands. Ethel leaned down. "You want an extra roll?" "Sugar?" The girl nodded shyly. "It is for my brother. He is still in the van." Ethel did not ask why. She just added another roll, 2 napkins, and smiled. "Tell him we saved him a seat." The girl nodded and ran off, boots slapping pavement. Malcolm stepped beside her, rubbing his hands together and blowing warm air into his cupped palms. "You still want tea? Where? Gloves?" He muttered, "I have got work to do." Ethel said. He grinned. "You are the only person I know who can serve bread and judgment in the same motion." She swatted him lightly with a napkin. "Keep talking. City boy, I will put you on dish duty." But then she saw something that stopped her mid-laugh. Ranger had risen, tail stiff, body low, not frightened, but alert. He stepped away from the tables and moved slowly toward the back fence, where a man had just appeared from the shadows. He looked older than Malcolm, maybe mid-50s, with a grizzled beard and one arm tucked inside a too large coat, like it was holding something close. He did not approach the food line, just stood at the edge, watching. Ranger walked right up to him, sat, looked up. The man knelt slowly and placed his hand on the dog's head. His mouth moved. No sound carried. Ethel nudged Malcolm. "You see that?" "Yeah." They watched for another moment. Then Malcolm stepped forward, calm and unhurried, and Ethel followed. When they reached the man, he looked up, eyes sharp and yellowed at the corners. "Didn't mean to spook anyone," he said. "Just needed to see if he was real." Ethel's voice was gentle. "You know this dog?" The man nodded. "Not exactly, but he knew me. Used to wait under the bench outside the shelter, where I stayed, back when I was trying to get clean." Ranger had not moved. "He never came close," the man said. "Just watched, like he was keeping time." Malcolm glanced at Ethel, then back at the man. "You hungry?" The man hesitated, then nodded once. "I will get you a tray," Malcolm said, and turned back toward the tables. Ethel stayed. "You got a name?" she asked. "James," he said, "but folks call me Tiller. Used to work boats down near the delta." "Tiller," she repeated, testing the name like it was a hymn verse she had not sung in years. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a cloth napkin. It was hand-stitched. It's like the others they would started folding last week. Each one had a name sewn into the corner by the church sewing circle. Most were names from memory-lost relatives, veterans, ancestors, but this one was blank. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "This one is for you. You fill it in." He stared at it, said nothing, then tucked it gently into his coat. Ranger gave one short wag of his tail, and for the first time in a long while, Tiller smiled. That night, after the tables were stacked and the leftover soup packed into takeaway jars, Ethel walked home slower than usual. The stars were sharp. Her breath steamed the air. Ranger padded beside her, steady as a shadow. She thought of all the names she would fed over the years, names she would forgotten. Names that had disappeared but still clung somewhere in her bones. And she thought, maybe it is not about remembering them all. Maybe it is about letting one remember you. When they reached her porch, she did not go inside right away. She sat on the steps, Ranger at her feet, the red bandana catching moonlight, and she whispered into the cold night, "Thank you for waiting." Part 9. The weight of the apron. The first snow came silent. No warning. No fanfare. Just flurries drifting down in the hour before dawn, dusting the rooftops and quieting the streets like a hush had fallen over the whole of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Ethel Hargrove stood at her window, mug in hand, and watched the world turn white. She had not seen snow this early since '74, the year the boiler broke at Jefferson Elementary, and she would cook stew on a hot plate in the teacher's lounge for a week straight. She smiled at the memory, tired and fond, like an old song sung in a key too low. Behind her, Ranger gave a soft huff in his sleep, his paws twitching in a dream. Today was Saturday, and tonight would be the first indoor supper. Malcolm had relented after 3 guests left early last week with hands too stiff to hold their forks. The old armory had opened its doors, thanks to a retired fire chief with keys and a soft spot for second chances. But moving inside meant something different. It meant permanence. Ethel was not sure how she felt about that. At midday, she stood in front of her closet holding the apron. It was pale yellow, stitched at the hem, one strap mended with blue thread, faint stains coffee, tomato, peanut butter from some long-forgotten elementary riot still marked the fabric like ghosts. She had not worn it since the day she retired. It felt like armor. She slipped it over her dress and tied it tight, then reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out the silver serving spoon, the same one she used to tap on lunch trays when the noise got too loud. Tonight, she was not just helping. Tonight, she was showing up as herself. The armory buzzed with warmth. The folding chairs had been wiped down, long tables stretched end to end like a banquet, and strings of old Christmas lights blinked from the rafters, casting soft glows over steaming trays of stew and sweet potato casserole. Ethel stepped through the side door and froze. At the front of the room, a giant corkboard stood propped against the wall. Pinned to it were the napkins, the stitched ones, the blank ones, dozens of them. Each one now held a name, some embroidered, some written in careful marker, some just first names, others full: Josiah, Miss Tina, Baby. Each one a person fed, a person remembered. Above the board, someone had scrawled, "No one sits unseen." Malcolm appeared at her side, breathless. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "You did all this?" He shook his head. "We did." She turned to him. "I brought food once. You brought a table." He looked back at the names. Ranger brought both. That night, the line stretched out the door. The soup was ladled heavy. The music was soft. And at the far end of the room, Tiller sat beside the girl with the pink gloves, helping her button her coat. He had cleaned up, trimmed his beard, wore a fresh scarf. Ethel moved like muscle memory. Napkin, tray, slice of cornbread, next. But it was more than routine. It was ritual now, sacred. And when a little boy dropped his roll and started to cry, she knelt beside him and handed him another, warm from the basket. "It is okay. Sugar," she said, tucking the napkin into his collar. There is always more. Behind her, someone tapped a glass with a spoon. Malcolm stood at the front of the room. "Folks," he said, voice loud but steady, "we have someone special here tonight. Someone who has fed more people than any fancy restaurant in this town. Someone who never asked for thanks." He looked at her. "Ethel Hargrove, would you come up here a moment?" The room turned. The noise quieted. Ethel's legs did not want to move, but Ranger nudged her from behind, gentle but firm. She walked up, apron still tied, silver spoon clutched in her hand. Malcolm smiled and gestured to the center table. There sat a place setting, plate, cup, napkin, this one stitched with her name. Ethel. Her breath caught. He pulled out the chair. "Sit a spell. Miss Hargrove, let us serve you for once." She sat, not because she was tired, but because it was time. The room rose in applause, not loud, not showy, just grateful. And Ranger, he lay beside her chair, eyes closed, tail thumping once, like the final punctuation to a sentence that had taken years to write. Later that night, back at home, Ethel took off her apron and folded it over the back of a chair. The silver spoon went back in the drawer. She looked at the dog, now dozing by the heater, and said, "You stayed long enough to see it through, did not you?" He did not lift his head, but she knew. He always knew. Part 10. The dog beneath the table. The first real snow fell the day after Christmas. Heavy, wet flakes this time, blanketing Pine Bluff in silence and softness. It hushed the streets, slowed the cars, and painted the town in forgiveness. Ethel Hargrove sat by the window, watching children drag sleds across the schoolyard, across the street where Raymond once mowed grass, where her daughter had played kickball in saddle shoes, where her knees had begun to ache the year she turned 60. The kettle whistled, and she rose slowly, hand on the edge of the table to steady herself. Ranger did not stir. He lay beneath the table, like always, head resting between his paws, breath shallow but even, the red bandana still tied neatly around his neck. "Tea's almost ready," she told him, voice soft, "and I baked sweet rolls, the kind you like." She did not expect him to answer, but part of her had hoped for a tail thump, a flick of an ear, anything, but he did not move. It was not like before, when he would vanish and come back with burrs in his coat and the smell of alley dust in his fur. This was different. He had not eaten since Tuesday. Hadn't he followed her to the armory for the Last Supper? Hadn't he moved from beneath the table, just watched her, those amber eyes quiet, like he was waiting for her to understand? She sat beside him now, lowered herself to the cold floor, joints complaining all the way down. She whispered, "You have done enough. You hear me? You stayed long past your time." His eyes met hers, gentle, steady. She stroked his head, and her voice cracked on the next words. "I am not hungry anymore." A silence settled between them. Not empty, not sad, just full. Full of rolls given and meals shared, of cornbread crusts, of names written on napkins, of laughter around borrowed tables, of children who smiled for the first time in weeks, of the boy she once fed becoming the man who made her feel remembered, and the dog who had waited under every table in between. He passed quietly, sometime in the early morning, while the town slept beneath the snow. No cry, no struggle, just a final breath, warm against her hand. Ethel held him until the light crept into the window and caught on the frost there, bending it into gold. Then she rose, slow and steady, and reached for the shovel. That afternoon, under the old magnolia tree behind her house, she buried him, wrapped in the quilt she would meant to finish last spring. The one with the crooked stitching and frayed edges. The one that had sat beside her chair every Sunday evening while she watched the news and talked back to the anchors. She placed the second collar, his twin, on top of the quilt, the one she had saved all those years, the one that belonged to the boy who had once lived in a shed behind the school. She pressed her hand into the snow, over the mound, and whispered, "Thank you for waiting, for remembering, for staying." At the next Saturday supper, she stood by the front table, a pride neat, silver spoon in hand. The crowd was larger now. Word had spread beyond town. A local paper had written about at the table that fed a town, but Ethel did not care about that. She only cared that no one left hungry, that no one sat alone. At the corner of the room, beneath the napkin board, someone had placed a new cloth, bright red, stitched in clean, careful letters. "Ranger," he waited. Ethel stood quietly in front of it. No words. Just breath. Then a boy with a runny nose tugged at her apron. "Madam," he said, "can I sit with you?" She turned, smiled, and offered him her hand. Later that night, as she washed the last of the dishes and locked the armory doors, she paused beneath the porch light and looked up at the sky. Snow fell again, lighter this time, gentle. She tilted her face toward it and said, "I see you, old friend." And maybe, just maybe, she felt a warmth brush against her leg, like a tail, like a promise, like a dog, still waiting under the table, but not for her anymore, for whoever needed him next. The end.